Hello! I'm back with another look at PragerU garbage because I just can't help myself. That and also the video we'll be taking a look at today has our favorite benzo addict lobster boy starring in it. Christmas has truly come early. Now, I've earlier made several videos on Peterson detailing his completely nonsensical philosophy, worldview, and sexual fantasies about his grandmother. Yes, that's real, and I'm sorry. He's your typical quote-unquote free-thinking conservative lib that denies climate change, claims to eat only meat and be able to stay awake for 3 weeks straight, and most importantly of all, is a believer in that you should solve your issues yourself by reflecting inwards and cleaning your room. Done best in the example of himself, where he overdosed on benzodiazepines and required emergency medical care so he doesn't die. Note, I'm not making fun of the addiction, but the fact that somebody whose entire grift was taking personal responsibility for oneself, being chronically dependent on medication so the anxiety doesn't eat him out from the inside. Maybe, if we were more empathetic, the people he preached to, too, would seek help rather than basically devolve into blaming blacks, women, and gays for all their problems.
You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people.
Exactly. You should join the Patreon.
They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology.
2 for 2. He must be a subscriber.
They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal.
Beyond based. Also, where's the lie? Just to unpack the sheer tonnage of garbage that he managed to deliver in just a few seconds. Number 1, resentment-ridden ideology. We'll find out which ideology means exactly in just a second, but isn't everything Peterson preaches too resentment-ridden? Women not sleeping with me are the fall of civilization. I've seen 2 blacks today minding their business and it made me uncomfortable. In the 50s, women knew their place. The minorities were the help, and no one questioned the fragile ground on top of which my undeserved sense of superiority stood. Also, modern neoliberalism, as championed by these types, has nothing but the utmost contempt for the poor, regularly advocating for privatization, reduced benefits, cuts on socially useful spending, healthcare, education, etc., not out of some scientific loyalty to the data, but out of sheer greed for further profits. The research is clear. Privatizing stuff doesn't make them better, it only makes them yield larger profits for the owners. This isn't an intelligent way to run a society. On his undermining Western civilization point, again, based, but also, what even is Western civilization? No, really, please, interrogate these types when they say shit like this. I made a video long ago on this point, here. They'll say nonsense platitudes like freedom, but when pressed, you'll find out it's basically being a white and capitalist society. The US, the supposed pinnacle of Western civilization currently, is corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. These are truths. Just because they're uncomfortable to you doesn't make them cease to be that. But Peterson and his ilk don't care and don't want to change anything. They want to go back to a time when it was basically exactly the same, if not worse. But they didn't have to hear about it. That's why you see that they only became politically active not to champion the rights of the oppressed, but to push back against being told that, hey, that stuff you said about minorities isn't cool and you should sort out your views on women. The lack of introspection is actually pretty impressive.
If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting this gang of nihilists.
I wonder who these people are. Are they like random stock footage people? God, if so, then I really do feel bad for them for being in a PragerU video. Also, capitalism is the nihilistic philosophy built on infinite growth on a finite planet till the death of the biosphere. Why? Because some guy wants a second yacht. Not exactly an intelligent way to organize society, don't you think?
You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems.
This is a strange claim that he doesn't substantiate. First of all, yes, postmodernism in general has a distrust of grand narratives, and it's just another prong of garbage liberal analysis. That's why Marxists are explicitly against it. Not like Lobster Boy would know, that would require him to actually read. But there are definitely some so-called truths that are subjective. We are not at the end of history, which was a neoliberal truth accepted as gospel for like 3 decades. Just a strange point to make. No serious analyst or academic, let alone revolutionary, has ever said that imperialism is the only reason for the issues of the imperial periphery. In fact, that's your side that goes to the other extreme, claiming that Western imperialism was a net benefit, if not almost entirely beneficial, to those same imperial periphery countries. With that said, though, Western colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism has systematically created instability wherever it went by design. It ruined local production and retooled local industry for its needs only. It destroyed local resistance to it for cheap labor and cheap resources. It instigated famines in order to profit, and most importantly, to this day continues the cycle of impoverishment by maintaining the countries of the imperial periphery at a reduced level of economic development to avoid competition with itself. To deny this is to deny reality. Western neoliberal restructuring of third world economies is intended to improve conditions in those countries. It's done to increase profits of the nation doing the imperialism. Western military intervention in third world countries isn't for freedom and democracy. It's to maintain power imbalances in the region and to get access to raw materials and natural resources. If the US and NATO really cared about human rights, freedom, and democracy, they'd be talking about Saudi Arabia, not Cuba.
They are the postmodernists, pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers, the language police who enshrine into law use of fabricated gender pronouns, and the deans whose livelihoods depend on madly rooting out discrimination, where little or none exists.
More leftist speakers historically have been barred from speaking at universities than your average racist, so that's nonsense. Parenti was the example of this. About pronouns, what's so hard about using someone's preferred pronouns? Generally, who cares? Don't you have anything better to do with your time? When somebody gets married and adopts the name of their spouse, or a woman wants to be called Mrs., for example, do you also stubbornly refuse to call them by their new name or title in like work settings or something? Please, touch grass. By the way, I love how they put up an imaginary image of the language police because, they don't exist. Meanwhile, say the wrong thing to a cop at a stoplight and you could be shot. And I love the stern-looking dean here. What's wrong with rooting out discrimination? Why are you so obsessed with protecting the rights of those who want to discriminate? Genuinely, contrary to what you believe, research consistently shows systemic bias against minorities, women, etc. in education, employment, and even bullshit like trustworthiness. I'd rather someone be over-vigilant against discrimination than the inverse. You probably don't, lobster boy, because you've never actually been discriminated.
Their thinking took hold in Western universities in the 60s and 70s, when the true believers of the radical left became the professors of today.
Most hippies were spineless liberals. The actual true believers of the radical left, meaning, for example, the Maoist groups of the era, are all either dead or in prison, murdered by a tyrannical state afraid that the Browns will get ideas, especially when said Browns were getting said ideas from the successful revolutions of Browns abroad. Read a book, please.
And now we rack up education-related debt, not so that our children learn to think critically, write clearly, or speak properly, but so they can model their mentor's destructive agenda.
School debt is a policy issue in the US, and is not some, Marxist ploy, or I genuinely have no idea what he's trying to say here. Also, the educational system in the US is so bad that the average American can only read at a 6th grade level, but I hope you're not saying that this is a ploy by the postmodern neo-Marxist 3rd grade teachers to indoctrinate little Billy into not calling his neighbor the N-word or something. This is a fundamental failing of the system you champion, dumbass. As for modeling their mentor's destructive agenda, doesn't that mean that if I take you as a mentor, I need to start popping pills? Arguably, your nonsense has been more destructive, particularly to younger white men, than anything some literature class they're barely listening to delivered.
It's now possible to complete an English degree and never encounter Shakespeare, one of those dead white males whose works underlie our society of oppression.
Fuck off, no one has ever called Shakespeare an oppressor, and the dead white male meme is mostly that, a meme. Wanting people to engage with the writing of women, the indigenous, people from other cultures, etc. isn't only constructive, but long overdue, especially when many of those same ideas that those dead white men taught had roots in some form or another from those groups. By the way, from a quick Google search, it seems that many English degrees offered in the US have elective courses you choose, and some students chose someone else over Shakespeare. Oh, the humanity. I understand that this is some affront to Western civilization, really.
To understand and oppose the postmodernists, the ideas by which they orient themselves must be clearly identified. First is their new unholy trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh no, not diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was a whites-only club, how dare you? Okay, do I really need to say anything here?
Diversity is defined not by opinion, but by race, ethnicity, or sexual identity.
Isn't that why all those Japanese were thrown into internment camps, or slavery, or the genocide of Native Americans? Didn't you specifically seek out your anti-diverse agenda on the basis of them being different by skin color and other factors? Doesn't your lack of consistency give you at least a little bit of a headache?
Equity is no longer the laudable goal of equality of opportunity, but the insistence on equality of outcome.
Absolute strawman, you and your ilk are the ones with Russell Jimmies complaining about affirmative action. Lenin even specifically said equality of opportunity is the desire of Marxists. But you'd know that if you skimmed more than just the Communist Manifesto, you absolute charlatan.
And inclusion is the use of identity-based quotas to attain this misconceived state of equity.
What did I just say? Firstly, the quota stuff is blown way out of proportion, and if you were to look into it, nepotism and corruption has brought far more incompetent wasps with no credentials into positions of power than the 2 reserved spots for indigenous people in med school or whatever.
All the classic rights of the West are to be considered secondary to these new values,
And what exactly are those rights of the West? Habeas corpus? That's why Huey P. Newton was in prison on trumped-up charges, right? Or is it the only right that has ever been respected on your side, the right to property? Of course, though, not for the poor. Those who lose the most property and wealth during economic unrest have always been the rest of society, not the ruling class. The pandemic was a perfect example of this. That's why Marx said that private property, for all intents and purposes, has already been done away with for 9/10 of the population.
Take, for example, freedom of speech, the very pillar of democracy. The postmodernists refuse to believe that people of goodwill can exchange ideas and reach consensus.
That's not the freedom of speech you want to defend. Funnily enough, your tirades against neo-Marxists specifically seeks to limit their influence, as evidenced by this video. You can't argue against them, so you seek to silence them. That being said, though, neither these postmodernists nor these phantom neo-Marxists exist in American or other universities.
Their world is instead a Hobbesian nightmare of identity groups warring for power. They don't see ideas that run contrary to their ideology as simply incorrect. They see them as integral to the oppressive system they wish to supplant, and consider it a moral obligation to stifle and constrain their expression.
So, for example, white supremacy, an ideology that has been ingrained into almost every field of study, including supposedly objective and scientific ones, such as medicine, wasn't integral to the general system of institutionalized discrimination that existed in the US for centuries. It isn't something that deserves to be dethroned. He's generally either confused or just annoyed that things are changing against what have used to bias towards him.
Second is rejection of the free market.
An objectively good thing, but go on.
Of the very idea that free voluntary trading benefits everyone.
But that's objectively not true. Jun Chang wrote entire books on the topic. Firstly, there's no such thing as a free market anywhere. And market liberalization efforts, particularly those aimed at the imperial periphery, have been catastrophic. Latin America and West Africa being prime examples. Yet again, read a book, please.
They won't acknowledge that capitalism has lifted up hundreds of millions of people, so they can, for the first time in history, afford food, shelter, clothing, transportation, even entertainment and travel. Those classified as poor in the US, and increasingly everywhere else, are able to meet their basic needs.
Let's see here. Which country did the overwhelming majority of that lifting, Oh, well, would you look at that, the People's Republic of China, the Communist People's Republic of China. There are those that like to play the silly game of, but it was capitalist reform in China that caused that. Which, number one, no, it wasn't. Number two, referring to China as capitalist is almost stupidly reductive. And number three, you can't say that China's communist when something you don't like happens, and China's capitalist when it's something good. Taking China out of the equation, the reduction in total poverty has been far less impressive. As for the poor in the US, their situation has been getting worse, not better. Wages have been stagnant for decades. Inflation is eating through their purchasing power and savings. Most of them can't even afford a $500 emergency. Even giving the claim, which I wouldn't, being wealthier than a farmer in Ghana when living in the wealthiest country in existence isn't really an achievement when you're still living paycheck to paycheck. But they're poorer over there isn't an argument when the person you're talking to is unemployed, hungry, undereducated, or miserable. Literally the just be happy advice to a depressed person. I really wonder what planet Peterson lives on.
Meanwhile, in once prosperous Venezuela.
Oh Lord, Vuvuzela. How many times will they beat this dead horse? I'm not going to go through this again, but it's very objectively wrong, the point he's making. Please refer to the 17th minute of this video for a deeper dive.
Until recently, the poster child of the campus radicals, the middle class lines up for toilet paper. Third and finally are the politics of identity. Postmodernists don't believe in individuals. You're an exemplar of your race, sex, or sexual preference. You're also either a victim or an oppressor.
You're in fact all of those things, if you can believe it. You may want to be just an individual, but that won't stop an employer or a cop from discriminating against you based on your ethnicity or other factors. That's why those things matter. The world isn't black and white, my guy.
No wrong can be done by anyone in the former group, and no good by the latter. Such ideas of victimization do nothing but justify the use of power and engender intergroup conflict.
This is also a gross mischaracterization of current sociology. Hyperbolic language at a protest and real analysis are two different things. The vast majority of white people aren't evil, whatever evil means. But the vast majority of white and white-passing people do benefit from a certain privilege awarded only to white people within a white system. Recognizing this is simply observing the truth. A kidnapped white woman will receive more media coverage than a missing black woman. This is fact. White men that commit crime are more likely to be portrayed in wholesome family photos, while black men that commit crimes are more likely to be portrayed in a mugshot. White-sounding names get more callbacks for jobs than black-sounding names. This extends into almost every sphere of life, in which being white is a net benefit based solely off of being white, and the inverse for not being white. To deny this is to deny reality, something Peterson's very fond of doing.
All these concepts originated with Karl Marx, the 19th century German philosopher. Marx viewed the world as a gigantic class struggle, the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the grasping rich against the desperate poor.
That's not exactly right, but okay, whatever. Also, bourgeoisie and proletariat aren't defined by wealth, but by their relations to the means of production. Marx's analysis is incredibly intricate and sophisticated, but I understand why Peterson made this mistake. He's never read any Marx, as evidenced by his tutoring sessions from Zizek.
Again, it's not a rhetorical question for politely saying you are an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about.
But wherever his ideas were put into practice, in the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, to name just a few, whole economies failed and tens of millions were killed.
This could be a very long discussion, but that would miss the point. Firstly, the USSR and China have raised more people out of poverty than any other society, as well as were the two fastest growing economies of the 20th and 21st centuries, despite unending diplomatic vilification, sabotage, economic embargo, etc., etc. I've made videos covering the superiority of socialism over capitalism here. Secondly, the death toll of Vietnam was because of the illegal American aggression against Vietnam. Very strange to point to a war that America started as resulting in deaths within socialism. Also, Cambodia was a CIA-sponsored nightmare that was put to bed by, you guessed it, Soviet-backed socialist Vietnam. Please read a book. Finally, measuring deaths is pointless, but if you're really going to have that as your metric, then capitalism's a far more destructive system that has resulted in much more deaths over the past century. For more information on that, check out this video here.
We fought a decades-long Cold War to stop the spread of those murderous notions.
Oh, is that so? Is that why the US invaded, or otherwise meddled in? Grenada, Cuba, Guatemala, El Salvador, Thailand, Italy, France, Iran, Syria, Turkey, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Vietnam, Korea, China, Russia, Poland, Greece, Iraq, the Congo. I can go on for a lot longer. Obligatory book recommendations are Killing Hope by William Blum and The Triumph of Evil by Austin Murphy. Also very funny that the US fought against any murderous notions. The US is the single largest supporter of dictatorships globally. They're in fact the #1 fans and purveyors of murderous notions, both by word and deed.
But they're back, in the new guise of identity politics. The corrupt ideas of the postmodern neo-Marxists should be consigned to the dustbin of history.
You know something? Zizek asked Peterson to name some of these all-pervasive postmodern neo-Marxists, and he couldn't. Not one guy. I'll show the clip, actually.
Who are? Give me some names and so on. And who are these postmodern egalitarian neo-Marxists? And where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an impotent, an utterly impotent moralization. Please, I'm so sorry that I was too long.
No, that's no problem. Please. Well, I mean, organization like Jonathan Haidt's, what's it called? Heterodox Academy, and other organizations like that have documented an absolute dearth of conservative voices in the social sciences and the humanities, and about 25%, according to the what I think are reliable surveys, approximately 25% of social scientists in the US identify themselves as Marxists. And so there's that.
But where are the results?
Okay, but
can you name me one?
You basically just call anybody you don't like a postmodern neo-Marxist, despite the fact that, again, you cannot be a Marxist and postmodernist at the same time, because Marxism does have several overarching quote-unquote grand narratives, whilst postmodernism is by definition a complete mistrust, if not outright rejection, of any and all overarching grand narratives. Jesus, how does anybody take this person seriously?
Instead, we underwrite their continuance in the very institutions where the central ideas of the West should be transmitted across the generations.
Oh yes, Marxism, that thing that brings in all the big bucks. I can't think of a less lucrative path to take academically. Are you high? Also, a lot of higher education in the US is private, meaning dictated by the market. If they're getting a ton of money from tuition fees, then that's the market dictating what is right, no? In your eyes, isn't that a failure of the market in that case? Oh wait, I forgot. The market can't fail in your make-believe world.
Unless we stop. Postmodernism will do to America and the entire Western world what it's already done to its universities.
Inshallah.
I'm Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, for Prager University.
Oh boy, what a video that was, huh? A note on the sources of this garbage video. When they ridicule the notion that imperialism has played a role in the impoverishment of the imperial periphery, they reference a highly detailed International Socialist Review article with 94 citations, but provide absolutely nothing to refute it. I just thought that was funny. Their second source is an affiliate link with the Amazon page of Peterson's book with the aforementioned sexual fantasies about his grandmother. Also, the rest is either like 600-word articles written by Peterson or short clips of Peterson lectures. Talk about inadequate sourcing for your arguments. Don't believe me? Well, why don't you watch this clip of me saying the exact same thing? The article on white writers are disappearing from English language curriculums is a blog post from some right-wing page that admits in the end that white writers are still very much present in these curriculums. The left wants equality of outcome, not opportunity, is sourced by a grade schooler explanation PDF, which basically explains the differences between equality and equity, like drawings and all. All the rest is just that, either completely unsourced or links to clips of Peterson videos which equally have no sources. The worst part of all this is that people in the comments in the video are eating it up, and some are saying stuff like, I'm a teacher and I agree 100%. They're definitely a confused population. And that's all for this time. If you enjoy my pain, then please consider supporting me on Patreon, it really does help.